Bill Liggett, welcome to the Rocky Mountain Writer Podcast.
Thank you.
Good to see you. We happened to sit next to each other at the banquet at Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers Colorado Gold last September and
That's
got to
right.
talking. So I'm glad to finally get you on the podcast to talk about your books.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So we've got a pretty recent book that came out last year and another one that came out before that in 2017. The one that came out last year, Panic Peak, and before that, Watermelon Snow. But before we get to your books and just what they're all about, and because you draw so heavily on your background and your awareness about science and what's happening to our climate. Can we just start with your background, what you did with your career? Can you tell us about your training?
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah. I want to actually go further back at some point about sort of my interest in writing, which was
yes.
more recent, but my more formal background was in college. I majored in geology. Part of that was growing up in Colorado. I was born in Denver and did rock climbing, mountain climbing, and everything growing up. And my grandfather actually was a prospector, so I sort of came by interest in rocks and minerals indirectly through his history. Um, but I really didn't want to work on an oil derrick or in a mine somewhere, and so I took my training and taught earth science in Santa Cruz High School, actually, for a few years, and then went on to get a PhD in applied social psychology. I found that over time I liked studying people a little bit more than things. So,
Yeah.
so that's where I went, and I got my PhD, and then worked for IBM for 16 years as a behavioral scientist within the company, and then after that, I did some consulting work and some teaching. Um, but it wasn't until I retired about 10 years ago that I decided to try my hand at actually creative writing, and that's where it began.
Yeah. How about just your whole knowledge around or interest in climate science?
Well, golly, again, some of these roots go way back. I always loved clouds. You know, the sky in Colorado has always been so interesting to me. And when I was an undergraduate in college, I got a job working for NCAR when it was first formed. Actually, they were before they built the lab up on Table Mesa. It was in town, so I worked there for a couple of summers and studying clouds and well, different forms of study of clouds. Um, so that interest was sort of deeply ingrained in me. But I think what's happened is I've been able to take my background and interest in geology, along with, and I'll say more about this, but I had a summer job working on Blue Glacier in the state of Washington. So I spent 3 months on a glacier that became the setting for my two novels. And but because of just really over time, the concern about what's happening to our climate has become so pressing that I really decided that make that my main focus was dealing with global warming and climate change.
Yeah. What specifically did you work on
In terms of the writing,
in terms of the climate science? Yeah, we'll
yeah,
get to the writing in a second. What was I mean, there's so many different aspects of understanding what's happening to our climate. What was your
yeah.
specific interest?
Well, I really based it on my experience living 3 months on Blue Glacier, and this was in the early '60s. That right out of high school, I had that job, and they have what are called lateral moraines, where the earth and all the rocks and everything that the glacier chews up was deposited along the side. And back then, we didn't really know whether the glacier was growing or shrinking. It was in a shrinking phase because the lateral moraines were taller than the ice. But but it became apparent, and that was really sort of a big theme of my first book was how these alpine glaciers are kind of the or were the canary in the coal mine with global warming. Um, Now the canaries are everywhere. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't have to look very hard to find evidence of change of our climate. But back then, it was not totally clear whether where we were headed. So that really became sort of a theme is where our climate is taking us. And um, so what happens in watermelon snow is there's an ice tunnel that is really kind of mysterious because the ice creates this blue hue to the blue tint of all the light coming through. And so in my story, um, the student that was studying the tunnel and um, his professor, Kate Landry, who is with him in the tunnel, come across an object embedded in the ice that's sort of beginning to melt out of the ice as it warms. And they don't really know what it is, but they're really interested in it. So the whole beginning of the novel is this mystery about what may be there, but they had to leave for that summer and come back the following summer to actually find out what it was. And so the much of the story really is based on that mystery, at least at the beginning. And once they discover it, then it creates all kinds of other problems.
And we probably can't give away what it is because that's too much of a spoiler at this point.
Exactly. Yeah. Although I have to say that it only remains a mystery for about 3 or 4 chapters and then it gets revealed.
Yeah. Okay.
But then there's still a lot of tension to be resolved.
Yeah. So what went into writing Watermelon Snow? How long have you been working on it and thinking about it? A lot of drafts. What was the process?
Yeah, well, like I say, I really wasn't a creative writing author until 10 years ago. So this was sort of a retirement activity that I had dreamed for years. You know, I had that romantic idea of going to a little cabin in the woods somewhere and closing the door and writing my novel. And that was kind of a lifelong dream that I'd like to do. So when I retired from the school district in Grand Junction, Colorado, um, I went to a drop-in writing group at the local Barnes and Noble that this retired English teacher was conducting. And so I ended up with the germ of the idea of my novel and wrote about 5 pages and then put it in a drawer. And but the I came up with the title almost before I did anything else. I had done a lot of climbing in Colorado growing up and come across this pink snow. This in the summer, you get these snowbanks that last all summer long. And very often you'll see this pink color on the surface of the snow. Well, somebody explained to me back then that this is called watermelon snow. It's an
Ah,
algae. It's a green algae, although it develops a pink color, which protects it from the ultraviolet light. And the neat thing is if you scoop some up in your hand and sniff it, it smells like watermelon. So that is not only the color, but the odor of it too. Then very quickly you learn you're not supposed to eat it.
yeah.
It doesn't taste like watermelon. But anyhow, I just thought that would be a cool title for a novel. So I really had that idea almost before the story began to take shape. But that algae, that pink algae, which is on the cover of Watermelon Snow, um, which is some people even call it blood snow because it's that
Yeah.
deep red color. Uh,
Yeah.
it actually plays a role in the story. So it's more than just cosmetic. It actually plays a kind of a central role in the play out of the story.
Yeah. So take us from those first 5 pages. You put them in the drawer. Then
Yeah.
what prompted you to go back and what was the process like from there?
It was really the Boulder flood in 2013. We had 3 days of rain, and as
Yeah.
you probably know, it it caused a lot of damage, but it also caused us to stay indoors for those 3 days. And my wife Nancy at the time and her who's passed away now, but
Yeah.
her sister, Nancy, and her sister were sitting there with me and said, "Well, why don't you read what you wrote?" So I read the 5 pages, and they said, "Oh, that's pretty good. Keep going." So I did, and every morning I get up about 4 or 5 o'clock, and I'm a morning person. Would draft, and for years I thought it would be really fun to use speech to text technology. So I used Dragon Naturally Speaking, and just sat there and talked. And after about 3 months, I had a first draft.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, it was kind of fun. It was just, and the thing I noticed, because I have my PhD in social psychology, all nonfiction, of course. It was so freeing to write fiction. You just make up stuff. You don't have to worry quite so much. And so I did. I just came up with this storyline. It really was it needed a lot of work. I mean, at that point, it was just really kind of a novella in terms of its length. And um, so I got an editor referred to me, Laurel Kallenbach here in Boulder, and she basically taught me some of the basic fundamentals that I needed, like point of view. What I wrote was omniscient. Everybody knew everything.
Yeah.
And she explained, no, no, they used to write that way in the 1800s, but we've kind of gotten past that. So she
Yeah.
taught me point of view, and also how to build intention. She used to say that you get your protagonist up a tree and then you throw rocks at them, and that's you just want some kind of tension to keep the reader hooked.
Exactly.
So it really helped me take my initial ideas of the story and turn it into a real story.
Fantastic. Wow. How long did that take then from,
From
that
that point,
initial draft to getting it ready to show to
yeah,
a
it
public?
was probably about 2 years, partly because part of the story takes place on the Hoh River Trail. There's a place on the Olympic Peninsula west of Seattle called the Hoh River and the Hoh River Valley. And that trail plays a really important part of the story as well. The protagonists, there are two of them, Kate and Grant, and they have to leave because of a violent storm that hits Mount Olympus. And so I had never actually been on the Hoh River Trail, and I wanted to have the benefit of firsthand experience. So I went on a backpacking trip with Nancy's brother and his son, and the three of us climbed up. I didn't quite make it to the glacier. We had 4 days, and it got steeper and steeper as the trail climbed toward the summit, and they dropped off, and then I kept going for a little ways. And um, so, but I had enough to really flesh out the rich detail of the whole river trail. So that it took me about 2 years from that very first draft to get it polished enough. And I had a publisher here in Boulder, Sandra Jonas, who took on the project. And her model is sort of 50-50. We share 50% expense and profit. Really nice
Yeah,
model. And she also helped me a lot with polishing what I had done as well.
that's great. Wow. And I gotta say, it was really done very well, wouldn't you say?
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I mean the over 1,000 reviews on Amazon, and
Yeah.
boy, the readers really, really seem to like it.
Yeah, I think it really did work, and it was just thanks to all of the input that I got from people that could help me. I have to say my initial thought was Grant, who's one of the two protagonists, in some ways is sort of modeled after myself. He's a social psychologist, and he's uh, he's kind of a scaredy cat. He's afraid of taking risks in his life, and he thought this contract with NASA to observe this research team on the side of Mount Olympus would be a way for him to get over being afraid of nature. So he goes up there, and he gets exposed to a lot of risky stuff, mountaineering and all kinds of things. and sort of finds his own inner strength as a result of all of that. So that's part of his growth.
That's great. Very good. Wow. All right. Well, let's take us through the journey then to book two, which just came out last year.
Yeah. So my vision is a trilogy. We'll see. I'm starting to work on book three, but book two takes a different emphasis. I did spend a little time dropping in to meet some of the scientists at NCAR as I was working on the first book. And one of the scientists there recommended that I focus on geoengineering, which was sort of a beginning topic at that time. Now it's really become kind of a hot topic because what's happened is as the planet has warmed, people are starting to seriously think about how we could engineer some cooling methods to kind of get things under control if it continues to spiral out of control. So the thematic focus of Panic Peak is geoengineering, and it turns out there's a climate scientist from Caltech who has developed methods to geoengineer the climate, but he can't get legitimate funding. He's gone to everybody and they keep turning him down because, in a way, and this is kind of reality, they're afraid that if something goes wrong with his experiments, they will sue him and his organization for causing the damage. So he ends up getting funded by a secretive cartel of oil producers who who want to use his technology. And so he has developed this scheme where he is testing out his technology of all places on Mount Olympus on the Blue Glacier. And so so Kate actually goes back to the glacier shortly after the episodes of Watermelon Snow to run another workshop with her graduate students. She finds that there's just mountains of new snow, and she can't understand where the heck this came from because worldwide these alpine glaciers are all shrinking, and here her glacier is actually growing. So it poses this mystery that she is determined to get to the bottom of. Meanwhile, the scientist that's secretively doing all of this geoengineering doesn't want to be discovered, obviously. So it sets up this conflict between these two scientists, and so that's kind of the basis of it. And she's very persistent, very intelligent glaciologist, and little by little, one by one, she begins to uncover his plot, which threatens him. And it actually ends up being a thriller because there is a villain and there's risk of death and destruction.
Yeah.
So, uh, so it plays out a little more in a different dramatic way than Watermelon Snow. Watermelon Snow was really man against nature. This one was man against nature plus, but evil men as well.
Yeah. Did you find the writing for the second one, your process to have improved in terms of you learned some things to avoid the first time around, and you knew about tension and point of
Yeah.
view, things like that. Did it go better the second time?
Well, I think so. It's so interesting though, writing a sequel, and Laura Kallenbach, my editor, cautioned me from the very beginning. Sequels can be a big challenge because you don't know quite where to pick up. Do you just keep going from where you left off? What focus do you take and everything? So it took me a while floundering a bit or trying things out to get the right focus and pick up the plot where it needed to be. But I had Kate and Grant. Uh, I can sort of convey the fact that they start out with a lot of tension between them, but they end up being a pair. They fall in love. And so in Panic Peak, that's a continuation of their relationship. They're together. Still, their future is yet to be determined, and there's tension there, but it's playing out.
Yeah.
And as far as the sort of the techniques, I think I did learn, but um, you know, I find it still very challenging to implement the whole idea of action focus, what I ended up finding in my own writing was a lot of the action was dialogue, that I could keep things going through interaction among characters, not necessarily physical action. And yet, because much of it does take place on the Blue Glacier, and Kate ends up there much of the time alone on the glacier, it tests her mountaineering skill to survive, and so there is action that way as well. But I still find that a challenge is to write something that has enough movement, enough action to keep the reader hooked.
Yeah, very good. Well, and the other thing I would assume, or just I'll just ask, is how much did you want to put in, strong ideas and strong opinions about what's happening to our climate? I mean, you balance forward motion and story with stopping to explain that we're slowly rolling toward a disaster here. Not
Yeah,
not so slow.
yeah. Well, I would say that much of that is conveyed through describing the conditions that the characters have to contend with. In the first one, there's a bomb cyclone major storm that hits, and they have to survive that. In the second one, there is also a whole series of storms because of the geoengineering. It just sort of one after the other. So part of it is to demonstrate how people contend with extreme weather and survive, and but also try to understand it as well. Um, what what I'm finding, Mark, is that um, my goal is the first book was in many ways introducing the two characters. The second book really focuses on Kate as the primary lead character, even though they're both in it. The intent is to make the third book focused on Grant, the social psychologist. So he goes to work at NCAR. He gets a postdoc appointment there, and he's, I should say that all of my books, I'm trying to tell a positive story and not a dark, scary, dystopian story about climate change, because there are enough of those books out there. So I'm
Yeah,
really trying to give people a sense of hope and what can be done with the climate conditions. I have to tell you that one of the things I want to do is to make my stories believable so that, a reader can say, oh, well, that makes sense, or gosh, that's a really hopeful solution that we might pursue. And what I'm finding in the last month or so, it's harder and harder to find, um, there's a lot of uncertainty about climate and the path we're on. And so it makes it more challenging to come up with things that Grant can do as a behavioral scientist to address these climate themes that have gotten a lot more uncertain in the last month, literally.
yeah, yeah,
So, so I'm not preaching. I'm really trying to come up with realistic scenarios, but I'm finding that a challenge in book three right now.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's really interesting. If you were to, just putting aside the storytelling, putting aside the fiction, if you were in charge of fixing this problem the globe has right now, what what would you prescribe?
So now you want me to be Grant and come up with a solution. See,
Yeah,
that's my challenge. Grant
yeah,
hasn't told me yet, but
yeah,
uh, here's the scenario that I'm trying to cultivate. There's a magazine actually was based in Boulder for a while. I think the editor may have relocated back to Oregon, but it's called Anthropocene. I don't know if you've heard of it, but every week, I guess, they come up with solutions to different studies that are encouraging, positive results, so that they're actually publishing findings about what can be done in a whole variety of ways. Some of them could be like treating the farmers' fields with certain kinds of materials that would absorb more carbon dioxide from the air, for example. Um, all kinds of different uh, things that people are doing to try to address the problem. What my thought is that Grant would see that. In fact, he's already kind of working on that at NCAR in Panic Peak. Um, but find ways to integrate all of these isolated positive efforts into some way that develops a little more oomph to it, a little more scope or scale that could work. And one way that could work in part is through artificial intelligence. So I've been playing around a little bit with AI. There's a program called Quick Write for authors that I put in a couple of paragraphs of my own, fed it into the AI, and it came out with this incredible plot scenario. It was really amazing. It's almost like they knew my characters and that like they'd maybe read my former books. Who knows? Maybe they had. But I think AI shows a lot of promise, both in terms of creative writing, but also in addressing the problems of climate. So that's my thinking now.
Yeah. Well, the AI issue for creative writing is a conundrum, I guess, because the issue and the problem is that the AI machines are using previous books that have been used and fed into the system without the author's permission in a
Yeah.
lot of cases. So you're, you know, basically, it's building on other people's creative work. So it's a dicey issue there.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's sort of, at least my very preliminary use of it was kind of like brainstorming with the AI.
Mhm.
Just have my ideas, throw it in the hopper and see what it spit back. And I found it helpful for my own creativity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, congratulations on both books. I've got to say it's kind of interesting slash ironic that it took a flash flood in 2013 or days of flooding,
Yeah.
a climate related event that caused you to get into the writing and
Yeah.
yeah, make it happen. Did
Yeah.
you ever stop and think about that?
Well, yeah, I mean it's really present in our lives almost daily. I mean,
Yeah.
I get articles sent to me with the Google the Google search function, and it's just constant, really, the stream of
Yeah.
climate related events. And
Yeah.
I guess for me personally, I felt like with my background, training, and interest. Um, which, by the way, I didn't really mention before, but I taught high school for a few years and then taught some classes in college, and I sort of see myself as a teacher even in my writing. So I'm introducing concepts like the geoengineering concepts, like even the watermelon snow, algae, and sort of introducing these concepts to the reader. And I sort of forgot where I was headed with that.
That's right. Yeah.
Other than just being a teacher, oh, I know. So I've decided that one of the biggest challenges humanity faces right now is climate change, global warming. So I'm trying to do what I can through my writing to help people. Initially in 2017, there were still a lot of people that were denying that the climate change is real. I
There
think
still are. There still are lots.
lots, but if you look at the survey results now, about three-quarters of Americans are acknowledging, yeah, we've got climate change. But then the challenge is, what do you do about it? And
Yeah.
that's the challenge.
Yeah. Well, in my personal opinion, it would be helpful if our leaders believed that climate change was a problem. That would be helpful. Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm talking about when I say the uncertainty in the last month.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I figured that.
yeah.
Especially in terms of grant funding and research and all that, if that gets
Oh, yeah.
Old. Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, Bill, again, congratulations. This has been a great rundown, and good luck with project number 3.
Yeah.
And
Thanks.
as we wrap up, we always like to give a shout out to another writer or book, something you think more people should be reading, or an author you think more people should be following. So now's your chance.
Oh, good. Actually, I have two, if
Okay.
I can. Um, on one of your earlier podcasts, somebody shouted out to who I would choose anyway, which is the author Margaret Mizushima. Um, I ran across her in the little bookstore in Estes Park a few years ago when I was starting out as an author, and she very graciously agreed to meet with me a couple of times, sort of author to author, and share some of her approach to her fiction. And I just have always liked her stories with Robo, the police dog, and
Yeah.
and
The
all of
power.
that. She was very generous, and so I really admire Margaret's work. Um, I also like the fact that she went to school in Saguache and Colorado and uses that setting of Colorado very much for her stories. The other thing I wanted to say was this isn't fiction, but Edward O. Wilson, E.O. Wilson, who died last year, is an entomologist. He studied the study of ants. He wrote the most comprehensive volume of ants, but he went on, he was at Harvard, and he wrote a book called Consilience, which really gives a whole history of kind of the man's quest to use science and rationality to understand our world. And consilience was a term that he used. He didn't invent it, but it hasn't used very frequently to talk about the coming together of all knowledge. So, of all the different disciplines, biology, physics, engineering, everything coming together with consilience. So, the book called Consilience really describes that and impressed so much out of me. I named my little self-publishing house Consilience Press as a result. So, I would recommend E.O.S. Wilson and Consilience.
Excellent. Excellent. Great recommendations. Excellent. Well, Bill, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Like I said, good luck, and maybe we'll see you again at Colorado Gold next September.
Well, I hope so, Mark. Thank you. Enjoyed it.